Hey, and welcome back. So in the last video, we built out the API and the CRUD for the API for the users, and now we need to build out the client one. So once again, I want to mention that this is going to be a lot of code, a lot of typing, and probably a pretty long video. So if you're not interested, go ahead and go to my GitHub. I'll post it down below, and just download all the code so you don't have to go through. But if you're interested in doing all this, let's move forward. So anyway, so this is our client. At the moment, all we have is just this very basic, hello world thing going on here. In fact, we're not even using any, we don't even have any components. There's nothing included, nothing. So we need to basically attach the server to the client. And in order to do that, we're going to use a module, or a plugin, however you want to call it. I like to call them modules. So call modules. Create a folder called modules. We're going to create a module called server.js, and we're going to create a class of server with a constructor, and then we're going to create and install a VueJS install. So we're going to basically install this class to every component so we can use it anywhere in the application that we need to. So we're going to do export default install view ops, and we're going to create a function called server init, like so. Okay, so let's see, we need to do const options equal this dot $ options, and we're going to say if options dot server. So if the server is already found, then we're going to say this dot $ server is equal to options dot server. Else if options dot parent and options dot parent dot $ server, then we're going to say this dot server is equal to actually we're going to do options dot parent dot $ server. And so this is basically doing is saying that if there's a server passed into the options here, we're going to use that. Otherwise, if there's a server on the parent component, we're going to use the parent component server. Otherwise, I'm going to create a new one. So this last else statement should only ever run one time because it will be on the root component. So first, we're going to create a cookie for our service. So cookie dot get. Oh, we need to actually import some of these things. First off, we need to import the config. So we'll say const config is equal to process.env, and that will pull in whatever files associated with whatever mode we're using. So in this case, development. And then we also need to actually install a few libraries here. So npm install Axios, QS, and cookie.js. Save. And that should be JS cookie. JS cookie. That's right. Okay, and then we'll save those, and then we'll import those. So import Axios from Axios, and import QS from QS. This is basically it's a library called query string. We'll use it to stringify our post objects. Import cookie from JS cookie. Okay, and then we need to use our cookie name. So what was the name of that variable? No, just a view app cookie name. Okay, and get a cookie if there's one available. So config dot cookie name, and then we're going to create this server object here. So we'll say this dot $ server is equal to server dot create. We'll pass in the cookie like so. And I'm going to create a few more functions here. So we'll say const uses init equal to view dot config dot underscore life cycle hooks dot index of init is greater than -1. Okay, and then we'll say view excuse me dot mixin. We'll say if uses init is true, then we'll pass an object that says init server init. Otherwise, we'll pass in a before create lifestyle hook using server init. Okay, there we go. So basically what happens is every component runs through this install function and will attach the server to itself using some of this logic here. Okay, and then we need to actually flesh out this server here. So let's see, we need a base URL. So const base URL is equal to config dot, what is the base URL? Or let's do we'll just wrap that template string. There we go. And then we were using v1 for our version, I believe, so we'll do API version is equal to, oh, well, we're going to default this, default API version config dot view app HTTP version or v1. Okay, we got that going. Now we need to create some save some data here. So this dot token is equal to token, and that's what's passed in from our constructor. Down here, if you remember, we look for see if the cookie exists. Basically, are they already authenticated? And then we're going to go this dot base URL is equal to base URL, like so. And then we'll do static create options. Oh, actually, it needs to just be a token, right? So token and return new server token. Okay, and that's that static function that we're using down here to create an instance of server. Let's see, then we need to, well, I need to add some helper functions here. So the first we're going to add is remove token, so that when they log out, the token will be empty. Token is equal to an empty string, cookie dot remove default cookie. Did I not? I didn't set that up here. Oh, const default cookie name is equal to config dot view app cookie name or example app, and we'll use that down here and also as well down here. Okay, and then we need to have a set token function because we have a remove function. Now we need to have a setter. Set token if token, then this dot token is equal to token and cookie dot set default cookie name with token, else this dot remove token. Okay, and then we need to do a set auth. So actually we need to go up here and set these as empty variables. So this dot email is equal to empty string, this dot password is equal to empty string, and then set auth. So we pass in an email and a password. We're going to say this dot email is equal to email, and this dot password is equal to password. Okay, and then we need to start creating our actual requests here. So the four methods we had before was an index a store, a update, and a delete or destroy. So we're going to use the actual we're going to use the method names for these actions. So the first one is going to be a get, and we're going to need a URL for that, and the data associated with it, the parameters, and if there's an API version, but we're going to default that to default API version, and then we'll say return this dot. We need to create that request. I should need to create that request object first. Request that function first. Let's go ahead and do that. We'll do that first. So let's do request URL data method token and API version, and then we'll say const API version is equal to okay, if there's an API version passed in the parameters, then we'll use that, and type of we'll just do basic checking. Then we use API. We'll use API version or default API version. Okay, and then we need a reference to the server itself. So self equals this. And then we need to set the token. So if a token gets passed in, we're going to assign that token to this system here. So self.set token with the token value, and then we will do method is equal to method or get, and then we'll do data is equal to data or empty object, and we'll say if not URL, we're going to throw an error, throw new error URL required to make requests. Okay, and then we'll say const URI is equal to base URL, self base URL, and then we'll say this part gets a little bit tricky. So we're going to say if we need an array of allowed requests that don't have the URL, because remember that auth login doesn't use this base URL, but we want to attach this base URL to all other requests. So we're going to have a little helper here to build that out. So we're going to say if it's not in this array, so we'll say what's the pass? We had auth login, and then we have an auth check. Oops. On the control. There we go. And I think that's all we have right now. Includes URL. Then we will do API version. Otherwise, we'll do an empty string. So if the URL doesn't include these strings, then we'll use the API version. Otherwise, we'll not attach that to the URL at all. And then we need to check to see if the URL is formatted properly. So URL 0, the first is not equal to a / Then we need to actually use a /. Otherwise, empty string. So this will ensure if they pass in a funky URL, we fix it for them. And then the last piece will be the URL itself. So this will actually generate something sort of like this. It'll generate HTTP localhost 8000 and then like auth check. Or if you pass in, let's say you pass in a users, what it will generate will be HTTP localhost 8000 v1 users, which will then be a valid URL. So it makes it nice and easy. You can just pass in what resource you want, and it will automatically handle it for you. And in fact, if you look at what we wrote there, you can actually just pass in just this, and it'll generate this URL as well, because you have this little check in here to make sure that the / is there. Pretty handy. Okay, so then we'll do const. We need to create a packet to send to the server, and the parts of the packet are the method, and then the URL is actually going to be the URI for the moment, and then the headers, we're not going to have any headers at the moment, empty header set. Okay, so then that should be, equals. Need an assignment. And then if we have a token, we need to attach that to this packet here. So we'll say if self.token, then packet.headers, and remember in our server we had add this X app token. We're going to use that, so self.token. And then we need to, let's see here, I don't think we need to do that. I think we are okay. Just a second here. Let's see. No, we should be good. So normally when you, because what we're about to do now is we're about to attach this data object to the server. So you kind of want to normalize that. So but the problem is it depends on how you're building your server. So normalize data packet. So what that means is if you have, let's say for example you have an endpoint that can accept numbers, but it always needs to be a string, then you need to make sure that your data packet is normalized for that, so that it actually is a string instead of a number when you pass it in. I hope that makes sense. But since we're not doing that, we don't need to normalize the data packet. But I'm going to put this note in here for yourself. You'll get an error like, type int is not equal to string or something like that. And that's something you need to add to your normalized packet that will ensure that the data is set properly. Okay, so then switch the method that we had passed in earlier, method, and we're going to want a default route first, default. And if it doesn't catch any of these things at all, then the packet.method needs to be equal to a get. The packet.data needs to be equal to an empty object, and the packet.params needs to be equal to an empty object. Okay. Now we do case get. Oops. Wow. Break. An actual get. So then this is packet.params is equal to data, or an empty object. So up here we passed in that data packet. So that basically allows you to do stuff like this. HTTP, let's comment that out, localhost 8000 and v1 users. Let's say you passed in a data object of ID 1, then that will allow you to do this. So and ID equal to 1, and that way you can query your URL. So get or Axios will handle it for you. And then we need to add all other cases. So case of delete, case of put, and case of post with a break. And we're going to do if URL is equal to auth login. This route needs to be a query string. So we'll say packet.data is equal to qs.stringify our data. Otherwise, we just want to set the packet header to application JSON. So content type is equal to application JSON, and then the packet.data is going to be equal to data or an empty object. And there we go. So now we have attached all of our data according to our method with the right, correctly. And then we need to use that data to actually return an authentication. So this is kind of cool. So what this is going to allow you to do is this is going to allow you, when we finish this next part, to pass in any kind of request. When that request fails, we'll auto-authenticate and then re-log in, which is pretty dang cool. So let me just show you how that works here. Let's go ahead and finish this. So now you got to actually use Axios. So return Axios with your packet that we created earlier, and then we're going to have a then function. So we're going to have the response from the server, and then we're going to return that response .data as the first argument in this packet. Otherwise, we're going to have a catch where we get an error, and if we get an error, we're going to say, let's see, if not error or not error.response, then we need to console log server issue. You should never actually see this, but we're going to put this in just in case. So we'll log out like what's going on here, console log the packet, and console log the error. And I don't know, we actually don't want to do that because it's going to return a bunch of nasty stuff. And then we'll return null with unable to communicate with server. You should never see this except for when you're initially setting up the server in case something's not set up right, but it's nice to have just in case, so you can debug what's going on. So let me say if error.response.status is not equal to 401, then we're going to return null and the error dot response dot data, which is basically the string that the server returns. And then if not self dot email or not self dot password, we're going to return null, no email or password associated with this account, please log in. Okay, and then we're going to actually make the login request. So await self.request. So basically calling itself request. We're going to pass in our auth login with the email self.email, password self.password, and then it's a post. So post. Okay, and then we will return self.request the URL, the data, the method, and the token that we got back from the server. So what this does is when you first log in, you're going to set your email and password into the system, so it knows how to log in as you. And then if you make a request later on, like let's say for example you're on the system for 2 weeks and your JWT token deauthenticates, this will auto authenticate for you back in and then make the request again for you. So pretty nice. And if it's not set, then we know, hey, you haven't logged in yet, return this error and we'll force you to log in. Okay, so now what we can do here is we can actually use this request to build out these helper functions here, being like get, update, whatnot. So dot request, and it's going to pass in the URL and the data. We can force get because we know it's get, null, and then the API version. Okay, and then we need to do the post. So URL, data, API version, and return this dot request URL, data, force a post, null, and API version. Okay, and then we have the update, right? Put URL, data, API version, return this dot request URL data. We're going to force a put method with a null for the token and API version. And then the last one we need to do is the delete. So URL data API version. Oops. And then return this dot request URL data delete method null and API version. Okay, so now we've built out a full server where you can use this to make requests. Oh man, I know that was a lot of typing, guys, but I think you'll see in a little bit it's very much worth it. So anyway, this server we built, we can use to make requests. So anywhere in the system, so when you're in a component later on, let's say you're in a component and you have this component going on and you have this mounted function, then you can just do this. You can say let response error equal to await this dot server dot get users. So that's pretty nice. It allows you just to go and grab all the user data and not have to worry about all that associated HTTP garbage. You can just say, hey, I want users, or hey, I want documents, or hey, I want user types with a ID, or actually we'll do users with a type ID of 6 or something like that. So I hope that makes sense. So what it'll do is it'll build out this cool little URI where it says HTTP localhost 8000 v1 users with type ID equal to 5. Now one of the things, so with Go, we're actually using, well, we're going to end up probably using query strings like this. So you'd want to do this, but whatever you're searching for on the server side, you'd want to match up with right here. Anyway, however you're doing your query variables. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. I'm going to leave this in here so you can take a look at it. And there we go. So that's we built out the server. So this video has already gone really long. I think it's maybe over half an hour. So I'm going to stop it right here, and I will see you guys next time, where we're actually going to utilize the server to grab users and then display it in the system. All right, see you next time.